Hello everyone, welcome to the Crash Course in Energy by the Energy Club IIT Bombay. Today we start a new module on nuclear energy. I am Anirudh Radhakrishnan and without any further ado, let's start. Let us start with some nuclear power statistics. Globally, around 10% of the energy comes from nuclear power, and in India, around 2.7% of the total energy comes from nuclear power. Globally, it's a fairly good statistic. However, in India, we are still lagging, and we can hope that this gets cleared in our future years. So these are the different types of reactors installed globally. The numbers aren't important, but it is visible that the PWR is much more greater in number than any other type of reactor. This is for both historical and scientific reasons, which we will discuss in a short while. So in India, there are 22 reactors in 7 functional nuclear plants. Total 35 terawatt hour was generated in 2017, and there are 7 more plants in construction as visible on the map. The red ones are active and the blue ones are being constructed. India now has diverted its focus from fission to fusion, or basically ITER, which we will discuss in some time, creating less nuclear fission plants. Let's have a look on a video about binding energy.
We have a go for main engine start.
Consider the Earth and a rocket ship which are bound together by gravity. If it takes work or energy to pull them apart, then the binding energy is the amount of energy it takes to completely separate them. Similarly, the binding energy in a nucleus is the amount of energy it takes to completely separate the protons and neutrons, collectively called nucleons. There are two forces acting inside the nucleus of atoms. The nuclear force, a residuum of the strong force that holds quarks together, is pulling the neutrons and the protons together, and the electric charge on the protons is pushing them apart. The strong force is a lot stronger than the electric force at short ranges, up to 2.5 times the proton diameter. But at larger distances, the electric force dominates. So as we add nucleons and work our way up the chart of the periodic table, initially each nucleus is generally a little more tightly bound than the one before. This chart gives the actual numbers. This increase in binding energy continues until we get to iron and nickel, where the nucleus has about 60 nucleons in it. At this point, the nucleus has a radius more than 2.5 nucleons wide, which you remember is the range at which the repulsive electromagnetic force begins to dominate. So as we add nucleons past this point, the electric force trying to tear the nucleus apart starts winning, and each added nucleon is a little less tightly bound. When we get to lead and bismuth, and the nucleus contains 207 nucleons, the electric force wins, and the atomic nuclei larger than this are unstable and come apart by themselves, although it may take a while. These larger nuclei can return to more stable arrangements in several ways. They can convert neutrons into protons and give off beta radiation, or kick out whole groups of nucleons, 4 at a time, in alpha radiation. Or they can simply split into other smaller, more stable nuclei. When this happens, we call it.
The binding energy stabilizes a nucleus. Binding energy per nucleon is called BEN and is the ratio of the total binding energy to the number of nucleons. The magnitude of BEN determines stability, and any nuclear material tends to achieve a larger BEN. Just to recall, fission is when one larger atom splits into two smaller atoms, and fusion is when two smaller atoms combine to form one larger atom. So fusion tends to occur in lower nuclei where Z is lesser than 20, where the larger nuclei offer a greater BEN. Fission tends to occur obviously in larger nuclei Z greater than 80, the smaller nuclei offer more BEN. Mathematically, Be, that is binding energy, is equal to delta M times C squared. Delta M is called the mass defect. This comes from the Einstein relation. Here, delta M is the mass difference between the actual nucleus and the net mass of the independent nucleons summed together. This difference occurs due to nuclear stabilization reasons, where nucleon mass is lost during formation of a nucleus. So an important thing, the term radioactivity or radioactive material would not be used since radioactivity is predominantly focused on the radiation emitted in a nuclear reaction, while nuclear energy focuses more on the energy aspect. The difference obviously seems subtle now, but innately is very important for the scientists researching on either field. So let's discuss the energetics of nuclear reactions. A nuclear reaction's net energetics can be calculated as net energy. This is similar to delta H in any chemical reaction, the enthalpy change basically, is equal to the sum of the binding energy of products minus sum of the binding energy of reactants. Use Einstein's relation and you will get this. An important aspect to note here is that delta M is typically negative for any atom because it's a stabilization energy. And keeping that in mind, if the products are more stable than the reactants, this entire term will be negative, similar to a classical reaction. Now, of course, this is a stoichiometric molecular reaction, and so the energy obtained will also be on the molecular scale. And so for values to be obtained in real life situations, you'll have to multiply these with appropriate constants of the order of Avogadro number. So an important aspect about any nuclear reaction is the conservation of the atomic mass number A and the atomic number Z. Just to recall, for any element X, the atomic mass number A is the sum of the number of protons and number of neutrons, and the atomic number Z is the number of protons. So the net atomic mass number and the net atomic number of the reactants and the products individually summed together remains constant in any nuclear reaction. For example, 235 uranium, when it combines with one neutron, it forms barium krypton and 3 neutrons. So this has to be considered as 3. If you try to sum them up, you will realize that this is 233, 236. This 2 is 236. You can verify the same for the atomic number. Same with this reaction. Again, this is 236, this is 233, and this is 236. So this holds for any nuclear reaction irrespective of what the reactants and the products are. So let's have a look on some classical nuclear reactions. There are these two reactions that have been used for decades in nuclear reactors. The first is the uranium chain reaction, in which a uranium atom is bombarded with what is called a slow neutron. This gives rise to 3 more neutrons which further attack uranium atoms, and this process carries on, which is why it is called a chain reaction, and this gives rise to a large amount of energy. A similar reaction takes place with plutonium, where an intermediate is formed. It's unstable and it gives rise to a similar chain reaction. You can see there are 3 more neutrons formed here, and there's another product too, but it's a minor product, so we can ignore it for the time being. The fission reactions by plutonium and uranium plants produce nearly 95% of the total nuclear power. So let's have a look on nuclear fuel. Nuclear fuel is the fuel used in nuclear reactors. Nuclear fuel are generally fissile materials or fertile materials. Fissile materials are those materials which can sustain a chain reaction. We have just now seen what a chain reaction is. Fertile materials are those which are themselves not fissile but can be converted into fissile materials using radiation or other processes. You can use metal fuel like uranium. 2 isotopes of uranium are generally used, uranium-233 and uranium-235. You can use thorium-232 and plutonium-239 as well. An important concept is of the nuclear fuel cycle, which is basically the fate of the nuclear fuel. It starts with the mining of the nuclear fuel, then it's refining, then it's purifying, then using it, and finally disposing it off. This cycle is very important because if any step in the cycle is performed incorrectly, it can give rise to many problems, because as we know, radioactive materials are generally not very safe. Now, some fuel are oxides to prevent combustion and oxidation problems. As you know, in a nuclear reactor, the temperatures are very high, and it's very much possible that there are combustion or oxidation problems if you tend to use metal fuels. So some reactors use nuclear fuel which are oxides of these metals themselves, so that there are no problems of oxidation and combustion. A special fuel is called MOX, which is a mixture of plutonium and uranium. The uranium used there is a special type which is called depleted uranium. It's a special type of uranium which consists of very low amount of uranium-235. Now the shape of the fuel is made into cylindrical rods to suit the conditions of the reactor. We'll see this in a while. There's another fuel called LEU, which is low enriched uranium. This is basically a fuel consisting of uranium 235 in large excess. And there's a final fuel which is called TRIGA. It's basically the training, research, isotopes, and general atomic reactor fuel. It's this uranium, zirconium, and hydrogen UZRH, and it's used for training purposes and research purposes. An important advantage of this is that the reactivity of UZRH varies inversely with temperature. So in case there's an emergency or a problem inside a reactor and the temperature goes high, there still won't be meltdown because this will stop reacting. And at the end of the day, generally actinide metals and their salts are used as nuclear fuel. We saw that there are oxides also. These are all actinides. You can use their oxides and you can use their salts of made with fluorine and chlorine as well. They are generally volatile and can be used in a nuclear reactor very easily. So we have been talking about the reactor for quite some time. Let's have a look on what actually a reactor is. So reactor is a chamber where large-scale nuclear reactions occur. This is not just the conversion of a small-scale facility to a large-scale facility. There are a lot more intricate steps involved, and which is why a reactor is very essential for three reasons. The first is scalability. So when a nuclear reaction is conducted on a large scale, there are large amounts of energy being released. There are a lot of products being released, and all this makes it very difficult to control the reaction, which is why scalability in a reactor is a very important aspect. The next is obviously safety and hazard-free conditions. Nuclear reactions can very soon turn into disasters, and we have seen quite a few disasters in the past, which is why safety in a reactor and hazard-free conditions are of utmost priority. Then there is release of byproducts. We know that in any nuclear reaction, you will at the end of the day get a lot of byproducts, and they have to be handled. They have to be managed very safely because they are at the end of the day radioactive and it's risky. So these are the three important points about any nuclear reactor. So let's have a look about what is scalability. So conducting nuclear reactions on a large scale is a major concern because of the large amount of heat and radiation generated by the reactor. We have talked about this. Now what we do for this is the walls of the reactor are generally designed from materials like heavy steel to ensure that no accidents happen. And on an average, 582 megawatt of energy is released from a standard nuclear reactor. So we'll just do a bit of math. 1 megawatt of energy powers around 650 US homes on average, and 1 US home is 34 Indian households. So you can just have a look on the large amount of energy that an average nuclear reactor possesses, and which is why it's very risky to let such a thing fall into an accident, and which is why scalability, which is basically ensuring that there are facilities enough for large-scale nuclear reactions to occur, and this is a very, very important aspect for any nuclear reactor. Another important aspect about any nuclear reactor is safety and hazard-free conditions. So nuclear reactors are generally designed with extreme safety precautions, including protection from earthquakes, faulty power issues, overheating, abnormalities in fission reaction, etc. After the Fukushima Daiichi incident, which was a nuclear disaster that took place in Japan in 2011, many more safety precautions were taken. So globally, all the nuclear reactors took extra safety precautions following the Fukushima Daiichi incident, so as to ensure that a disaster doesn't happen in the future. Workers inside the nuclear reactors have to wear special safety suits called hazmat suits, which are basically hazardous material suits made of polymer Demron or a similar material. Also, reactor areas, which are the areas surrounding the nuclear reactor, consist of lead protection, basically protection given by shields made of lead. Another important aspect about nuclear reactors are nuclear byproducts. Any nuclear reactor has to be designed in such a way that the nuclear byproducts can be easily dealt with. So one of the major nuclear byproducts or nuclear waste is the spent nuclear fuel. So after many cycles of doing a nuclear chain reaction or a similar reaction, what happens is the lower atoms, the lighter atoms which are formed by the reaction, start dominating over the nuclear fuel, and slowly the fuel becomes kinetically useless. Basically, you cannot use the fuel anymore. So this fuel has to be expelled from the reactor. This is mostly solid because, as we know, metals, oxides, they are used as fuel, so they are generally solid. But at times you might even have gaseous waste. An important one is tritium. And the problem is they are radioactive, they radiate, and which is why they have to be stored very carefully inside the reactor and then passed on very carefully. Another important product is radioactive iodine, which is released as a nuclear byproduct, which is sublimable, so which is why it has to be dealt with care. At times, spent nuclear fuel can be used in fast reactors. Fast reactors, instead of using the chain reaction that we discussed earlier, which uses uranium-235, uses uranium-238. And we won't be discussing fast reactors in detail, but it can be used as a reactant for fast reactors. Then there is high level waste, or HLW. It is responsible for the 95% of loose radiation which is caused by nuclear energy. At times what we do is the spent nuclear fuel is tried to be recycled, and there are two stages of the recycling. In both the first and the second cycle, a liquid called raffinate is released. Also, the nuclear fuel, the spent nuclear fuel, might consist of transuranic elements which have to be then stored in deep pits for centuries to come, because that's how dangerous this waste is. Another type of waste is intermediate level waste, which consists of chemicals used in the nuclear reactor, claddings used to keep the nuclear fuel in the reactor, or sludge generated in the nuclear reactor. And finally, we have low level waste, or LLW, which is basically like electronic items or paper which was there in the nuclear reactor. Basically anything which was not in contact with the reactor but is slightly dangerous. These are normally incinerated or buried in shallow pits. And there are mill tailings, which are basically when you create nuclear fuel, you have to give them a perfect shape, which is why some sawdust kind of material comes out, which consists of uranium and is called mill tailings. It also consists of transuranic elements and is considered as a high level waste.